Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I saw a comment that a subscriber made, which I'm going to flip in here for you guys. And I absolutely love what the guy's saying there. He's talking about how he remembers old timers in the gym talking about milking your gains, not being in such a hurry. And and he realizes back then, as he got older now, he realizes that those guys weren't talking about making slower gains. They were talking about a slow and steady race with progressive overload so that you don't get hurt, you don't get injured, so you can stay in the game longer and keep training year after year, decade after decade. Something we see a lot less of these days with older guys in the gym. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, do a little crafting, and talk about this. Yeah, the cliff notes. The cliff notes are basically what the guy covered there for people who don't like the longer videos. Slow and steady wins the race, guys. This is not a marathon. It's not a sprint. This is a marathon. As far as training and your gains go, you don't want to be one of those guys who's all busted up because you want to gain so fast that you pushed everything so hard that you got hurt over and over, and then you're crippled, you can't train right, you turn into one of those has-beens. You start seeing that in your 30s. Look at all the guys I talk about who are always hurt in their 30s. That's because they never learned how to train properly, even though they do whatever in whatever sport they compete in or whatever endeavor they're in or what YouTube channel they have. Doesn't matter. They're busted up. They're about to be has-beens. Why? They never learned how to train correctly. They never learned how to pace themselves. They never learned that you can work hard while still taking your time. You don't always have to push everything to the limit. It's about consistency. It's about balance. It's about not hurting yourself and being busted up all the time. And if you can come in and put in some solid work for a decade, you can make amazing progress if you can do it without being hurt. Getting hurt sets you back worse than anything. Getting hurt sets you back worse than being lazy and barely going to the gym. Oftentimes it's actually worse off. Sometimes the guy who only goes to the gym once a week and is lazy ends up 20 years down the road being better off than the guy who gets hurt all the time, because at least he's still training. And he ends up with more gains in the long term, and it's sad to say, but that's the truth. So let's talk about that a little bit, because it's something I talk about a lot. And I remember the first guy I ever heard use that term. I guess guys used to use that back in the day. I'm 39, about to turn 40, coming up in December here. And I remember guys 20 years ago, older guys, still talking about milking your gains. First guy I ever heard talk about it, the guy was obviously not natty, but he was up in his 40s and had with the most impressive physique of anybody I knew personally at the time. Guy didn't even compete in anything. He considered himself a bodybuilder, but he didn't compete. But he looked insane. And I'd watch him train. I mean, he was strong, but he would always talk about milking your gains. And he would tell the younger guys, don't be in such a hurry. There's still going to be gains to be made years down the road. Come in, train hard, use good form, clean form, keep all your muscles balanced, and don't hurt yourself. Get plenty of food, eat plenty of vegetables, get lots of sleep. Eat a clean diet, you'll be fine. Just don't hurt yourself. Use good form. And know when to quit, know when to back off, know when to take some extra days off from the gym. He goes, it's not a... He was one of those guys who would say that milk your gains, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And he would tell guys also, he was one of the guys I knew back then, and you guys recall Lawblinder told this same story, because we, I guess, grew up around the same era of guys. Guys used to tell us that you're lazy and you have no business using steroids if you can't get to a 300-pound bench, a 400-pound squat, and a 500-pound deadlift before you jump on gear, that you're just a lazy pussy. And that's how they used to tell guys that. And they didn't want to hear about some young guy who hadn't even deadlifted 500 pounds yet, walking in the gym and getting on gear. And these were bodybuilders. These weren't all power lifters. They still expected you to be strong. Well, he was one of those guys, and he would tell you that, you can't bench 300 pounds or deadlift 500. You got no business even looking at drugs. He's like, you have no business messing. You're just going to hurt yourself. You're a stupid-ass kid who's going to just be busted up and hurt yourself. It's like you need to build a base first before you even consider stuff like that. Learn the basics. Learn the fundamentals. Basics. And I'd watch the guy train. He was in and out of the gym in 20 minutes. Dude, probably did more cardio than lifting. But in his 40s, he was big and he was pretty peeled year-round. But he also did cardio year-round, used growth hormone and stuff like that. But I'd watch him train. He did a few basic movements and a few isolation movements. But, the guy would come in and he would pause incline bench 315 for his work sets. And when I say pause, I mean he would pause on his chest for a 1 or 2 count on every single rep. And, you know, and you'd ask him, he'd be like, well, that way I can't use momentum and cheat. He goes, the guys bouncing the bar off their chest are just going to hurt themselves, and you're going to end up with a small chest. He's like, you pause, keep your scapula back, keep your chest tight, and you put a good stretch on your chest on your incline, and you pause and hold it there. And he goes, if you can pause and hold it there, then you're strong enough to lift it. If you got to bounce it, then you're lifting for your ego. And that's how he would say it. But he would do reps with 315. He would do pause squats with 405 with no belt. Ass to grass, he'd do the same thing. He'd drop down ass to grass, pause for a 1 to 2 count, and squat him. He'd do about 5 or 6 reps. You know, and he only did 1 set of everything because he was big on the, you know, the 1 set to failure with perfect clean form. And then maybe he would do one big compound and then 1 isolation for each body part. And he probably only hit each thing once or twice a week. You know, he trained 3 times a week and came in and did cardio on his off days. You know, we'd see him on the treadmill more than the weights. But when he lifted, he was strong. And everything was paused because he was real big on rest pause training, like dead stop type stuff. So, I mean, it would end up being where the guy would come in and do that, 315, but he would pause, and then when he'd get near failure, you know, he would rack it for a few seconds and then unrack it and do another rep, pause rep. You know, he'd rest 5 or 6 seconds, do again. So he did, you know, the kind of the rest pause stuff, you know, somewhat Dorian Yates and Mike Minger inspired. He'd do his 1 set that way. But the guy was big and he was strong. I mean, he could pause incline bench 315 for reps, pause squat 405, ass to grass for reps. Same thing. He'd come and do weighted chin-ups. The only thing he did for biceps, he had big arms. They were lean, at least 18 inches, and the guy would do hanging, from dead hang, he would hang at the bottom for 1 to 2 seconds and then do a chin-up all the way up. And he'd do them with 90, 100 pounds. And then he'd do 1 set of curls afterwards. And he had massive arms. But that's how he trained, you know, and everything was clean form, good form. Rather than go to failure, he would just do rest pause so that he could rest a few seconds and then squeeze out 1 more clean rep. Rest a few seconds, squeeze out 1 more clean rep. And when it would dry, he'd have to grind 1 out, he'd rack it, and he was done. Guy trained that way. You know, and he rarely went up on his weights. And I'd ask him, he's like, well, eventually, you know, if I get bigger, I'll get stronger, but I don't necessarily add weights every single year to my list. He's like, some years I get lucky and I can add 5 or 10 pounds to a lift, and some years it just stays the same. He goes, but I don't worry about it because he's like, I've been making gains for over 20 years, and you know, I get a little more every now and then. It's no big deal. I get it when I can get it. It's like no point hurting myself trying to get more. And that was his attitude. And I mean, I have to say, I don't see 40-year-olds really today, and they're guys in their 40s, not many looking like that guy and being able to train like he does. And it did make an impression. It made an impression because he was one of those guys who would be like, look, you need to come in, you know, get stronger over time, but focus on the basics and just good, clean form, and don't hurt yourself. You know, he's like, don't start using sloppy form and bad form just so you can lift more weight for your ego. He's like, you don't get bigger that way. You don't get stronger that way. He's like, you get hurt that way. So yeah, I know exactly what this guy's talking about with those old timers, and those guys were right because these were guys way back in the day, up in their late 30s or 40s and sometimes 50s, who had been in the gym for decades and were still just trudging along, making it to the gym 3 or 4 days a week, making progress, and quite frankly, they were strong, fit, and in shape. And what more can you say about those guys other than they had figured it out? They figured out back then what some older guys have figured out today. Those were the guys who made it through the younger generation without getting hurt so bad that they couldn't train anymore. And you see a lot of that, and you see that today. Just like that other video I made talking about people talking about pain is like a rite of passage, feeling pain in the gym and talking about the burn and hurting yourself. Really training till you hurt, training till you're sore, training till you throw up. All this crazy nonsense that people come up with is why you don't see many jacked 40-year-olds. Only a certain number of guys realize that consistency over the years is worth more than pushing yourself so hard that you get injured. And that's the whole point of this, guys. Most of you are training so you can improve your quality of life in some way. You're training to be happy. You're doing this in some reason because you feel that some benefit you get from training will make you happy. Well, being injured and being hurt And having a body hurts and not being able to train the way that you want anymore in the long term is not a path to happiness, not a path to fulfillment. It seems like a lot of guys now who are using that term bodybuilder, which, I don't really consider myself one, and probably never will. Seems so many guys today that it's not about building their bodies, it's about destroying their bodies. And it's really ironic because many guys call themselves a bodybuilder and they're into body destruction. And it's all this nonsense. If I'm going to come in and tear muscle fibers down, you don't need to tear muscle fibers down. You need to come in and stimulate muscle fibers. You need to come in and balance your body. How about when you start to notice you're stalling on an exercise? Instead of keep trying to push harder and harder, there's another option there. Why don't you build all the support muscles up better? If your bench press is starting to stall, maybe it's a good idea to go ahead and build the rest of your shoulder girdle up more. Why don't you do a lot more face pulls, build up your rear delts, build up your traps more. Do some of that stuff. Build up your whole shoulder girdle, rotator cuffs, rear delts, traps, all of that stuff. Build all that up more while your bench press is stalling so that you have a more stable base to press from. You can maybe reduce your chance of hurting your shoulders when you do get that strength up. Focus upon those little things like that. Focus on muscle balance instead of always trying to push harder and harder on all the time on everything. Take some time to build your base up, build your support base up, build up your opposing muscles, and then eventually, you'll get stronger there. Your squat stalling, once you work your hamstrings and your glutes more. Maybe do some glute ham raises, build those support muscles up so that knee gets more stable, so you can counter your quads as they get bigger. And sometimes, that's what you need. Stability, balance, taking your time, milking your gains out. Because remember, at the end of the day, even if you're putting weight on the bar or reps or volume, increasing volume a little slower, if you're doing so without getting hurt, you're doing so without being forced to take downtime from the gym because you're getting burned out or injured or hurting or sore, you're going to be better in the long run. And that's what these older guys figured out, because your body will only take so much abuse. It only takes so much of pushing it so far before you start getting all this inflammation and tendonitis and everything else from these little nagging injuries in your connective tissue and joints hurt. And before long, you get to a point years down the road where training is not so fun anymore. And that's not a position to be in. That's not a situation anybody wants to be in, to where training starts to become so painful for you because you've messed your body up and overinflamed things for so many years that it hurts. And it's not fun anymore. Training's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be enjoyable. It's supposed to be something that you get to love doing because you love it, and it improves you as a person. It improves your health, improves your well-being, makes you fitter, stronger, healthier. It's not about injuring yourself and hurting yourself all the time. And the older guys who got through all of that, just like the guys of you today who are going to get through it, and like those of us now who are learning to get through it still, who've managed to not destroy our bodies, we're looking back saying, hey, you need to quit listening to these jackasses who are always hurt all the time. These guys who are falling apart now in their 30s and hurt and injured and ripping things and pulling things and having to wrap everything up, these are the idiots who didn't learn how to do it right in their 20s. If you follow their path, by the time you get to your 30s, you're going to be busted up, and by the time you get to your 40s, you're not going to be lifting weights anymore. And then what? Then you're going to be an old, washed-up has-been with arthritis and joints and tendons that hurt all the time, and you're going to be talking about how when you were young, you used to be so strong and fit and jacked. Fuck all that. Why don't you guys be jacked in your 40s and 50s still? How about we do all that? Let's all of us do that. How awesome would that be? Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.